Hi, I'm Milas. I paid $30,000 to make my sister's wedding possible, only to be told that my mother's new husband, the man who helped break our family, would walk her down the aisle. Not me. They called it a misunderstanding. They said it was just about appearances. But when your name disappears from the guest list, when your voice is replaced by someone else's charm, when silence becomes the only way they recognize you, how do you prove you were ever part of the story? Would you still show up? Or would you quietly take back everything they thought they could steal with a smile? It's funny how you can be so present in someone's life, and yet so easily erased. I've always been the practical one. The younger sister who filled in the gaps, cleaned up the messes, paid the bills no one talked about. Seraphine? She was the crown jewel. Every family has one. Mine just happened to sparkle a little louder, cry a little prettier, and know exactly how to get what she wanted without sounding like she asked for it. We were close growing up, or maybe I just thought we were. When Mom left Dad and remarried, it shook both of us, but in very different ways. Seraphine spiraled into her own world of performance, appearances, impressions, illusions. I dove into spreadsheets and student loans, working double shifts to carve out a life that didn't depend on anyone's applause. 6 months ago, Seraphine showed up at my apartment, tears smudging her eyeliner. She barely said hello before collapsing onto my couch like a wilted bouquet. Her fiancé had proposed, Darren, the quiet guy from the gym with a jawline you could use as a weapon, and now she was overwhelmed with the planning. May, she whispered, her voice trembling in that way she knew would land straight in my ribcage. I don't know how to do this without you. And just like that, the switch flipped. I wasn't her sister. I was her savior. I offered to help, genuinely. We sat at my kitchen table and mapped out every detail. Guest lists, menus, color schemes. There was a moment where she reached across the table, held my hand and said, "You always make things feel possible." That moment, that was the bait. 3 days later, I wired a deposit for the venue. $8,000, non-refundable. The florist came next, then the caterer and the photographer. Each invoice had my name on it. I told myself it was worth it. This was about family, about healing what had always felt fractured. If money could buy peace, maybe $30,000 was a small price to pay. I didn't even flinch when she picked the designer gown or added 50 more guests at the last minute. I wanted her to have everything she imagined. It wasn't about being repaid. It was about being seen, being appreciated. Then one afternoon, as I scrolled through Instagram during a coffee break at work, I saw it. A photo of Seraphine in a white dress. Just a fitting, not the real thing. But the caption hit harder than any bill I'd signed. Can't wait to walk down the aisle with the father I never had. The image? Her, arm in arm with Oswald, Mom's second husband, the man who broke our family in two and smiled through every Sunday dinner like it never happened. The man who never raised us, never sat through a parent-teacher night, but suddenly earned the title I thought belonged to Dad. Or, if not him, then maybe, just maybe, me in some symbolic way. I stared at that post for longer than I want to admit. The comments were filled with hearts and crying emojis, and "You deserve this, Queen." I looked for my name, scanned for any mention of me. Nothing. No, thanks to my sister for making this dream happen. No, couldn't do it without you. Just Oswald. Just the father she never had. I didn't confront her. Not then. I bookmarked the post, closed the app, went back to my spreadsheets and pretended my chest didn't feel like it was being vacuum sealed. That night, I poured myself a glass of Pinot and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling like it had answers. Maybe it was just a caption. Maybe she meant it figuratively. Maybe it didn't mean what I thought it did. She knows I paid for everything. She knows what I gave up to do this. She would never... But when I reopened the app and checked the post again, the comments had doubled. My name still wasn't there. And for the first time in weeks, I felt stupid. Link to next chapter. I told myself it was just a misunderstanding. But then came the rehearsal dinner list. I told myself it was just a misunderstanding. That post, Seraphine and Oswald, the caption about walking down the aisle with the father she never had to be symbolic, maybe even mistyped. We'd been working so closely on this wedding, she couldn't possibly have meant it the way it looked. Then came the email. It landed in my inbox around lunchtime on a Tuesday. I was reheating soup in the break room at work when the notification pinged. The subject line read, "Updated rehearsal dinner list." At first, I assumed it was routine, just logistics. But then I opened the attachment. My name wasn't on it. I read it again. 56 names, family, friends, a few vendors. Oswald and Vera were listed in bold under key family members, Darren's parents, their church pastor, even Zinnia, our second cousin, who Seraphine hadn't spoken to in 3 years. But not me. I sat there staring at my phone, the soup forgotten, the hum of the microwave sounding more distant by the second. My name wasn't a typo. It wasn't missing by accident. It was a deliberate choice. And I didn't know what burned more, being excluded or realizing I hadn't even earned a line item in my sister's celebration. That night, after pacing my apartment and trying to shake the tension from my shoulders, I called her. "Hey," I said gently, "I got the guest list for the rehearsal dinner." "Oh?" Her tone was distracted, like she was folding laundry or scrolling TikTok. "Is something wrong with the format?" "No, the format's fine, I didn't see my name on it." There was a pause, not quite long enough to be thoughtful, just long enough to feel careless. "Oh," she said again, "I figured you'd be busy with the setup that night. You know, coordinating vendors, helping the caterers, logistics." Logistics. It didn't even sting the way I expected. It numbed me instead, like my role had quietly shifted from sister to staff, and everyone but me had already gotten the memo. "You didn't think I might want to be there as your family?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're doing so much already, May," she said, all sweetness and surface. "I just didn't want you to feel pressured to juggle everything. You've always been amazing at managing things. Managing, coordinating, handling. What I heard was, you're useful, not needed." I don't remember how we ended that call. I think I said, "Okay," and hung up. I think she went back to pretending we were fine. 3 days later, we met at a bakery to finalize cake samples. She was already there when I arrived, flipping through her wedding binder like a CEO prepping for a board meeting. I sat across from her, stomach still hollow from that guest list email, trying to find an opening to bring it up again. She beat me to it. "Oswald's walking me down the aisle," she said between bites of lemon sponge cake. "It just feels right." I blinked. "He's always been more of a father to me than anyone," she added casually. Like it was a simple fact. Like it wasn't a knife. More of a father than anyone. Not Dad. Not even Vera, who'd raised us through the mess. Certainly not me, who'd been there for every collapse. Who'd held her when her first engagement fell apart. Who'd footed the bill for this entire performance. I wanted to respond, but nothing came out. My throat closed up, and all I could do was stare at the tiny silver fork resting on her plate, like it hadn't just been used to serve betrayal. She moved on quickly, talking about flowers, seating charts, playlists. I nodded, a ghost in the room. My face must have looked normal, calm, maybe even agreeable, because she never paused to check. She didn't notice that I stopped writing notes halfway through, that my eyes didn't follow the pages. That night, I went home and pulled out a shoebox from the top shelf of my closet. Inside were old photos, us at the beach as kids, Seraphine in braces, me holding her hand at her first recital. There was a program from her high school graduation, stained with coffee but still legible. A hospital wristband from the night she fainted after skipping too many meals during her sophomore year. I'd driven across the state to pick her up. No one else had answered the phone. These pieces of our past were supposed to mean something. I thought they were anchors. Instead, they felt like props in a show I was no longer cast in. I deleted the wedding folder from my computer that night. Not out of anger. Just fatigue. Link to next chapter. I didn't say anything that night, but I started packing away more than just receipts. I kept that one card. And then I stopped answering her calls. The silence didn't start as a strategy. It was more of a reflex, something in my gut shutting down. Every time my phone buzzed with her name, I stared at the screen until it stopped. I wasn't angry, not yet, just tired. Like something in me had been scooped out, and there wasn't enough left to form words. That weekend, the rain settled over Portland like a wet blanket, steady and cold. I spent most of Saturday on the couch, a blanket pulled to my chin, a lukewarm cup of tea untouched on the coffee table. At some point, I opened my old email archives. I wasn't looking for anything, but I found everything. There it was. A chain of messages from 6 years ago. The week Seraphine's first husband packed up and left with no warning. She'd called me in hysterics, unable to breathe. I'd dropped everything, driven through pouring rain with a grocery bag full of frozen dinners, tissues, and a bottle of red wine we were both too numb to open. She didn't want Mom to know, only me. She'd curled up in my bed that night like a child, whispering apologies between sobs. I didn't sleep. I sat beside her and promised she wasn't alone, that I had her, that she was safe. Funny how easily someone can forget safety once they feel invincible again. A few clicks deeper into my archives, and I found the bank statement. 4 years ago, she needed outpatient surgery. Routine, but her insurance wouldn't cover it fully. Vera was in Palm Springs with Oswald, unreachable. I'd taken emergency leave from work, paid the balance from my savings. I didn't tell her the money was supposed to go toward fixing my leaking roof. I told myself, that's what sisters do. No invoice, no mention. Just vanished into the fog. The final nudge came later that night. I was scrolling through my social media feed, mindless, just something to fill the noise, when I saw Seraphine's post. A throwback photo collage. Her hugging Mom, Oswald kissing her cheek, both of them standing beside her at her college graduation like they'd carried her there. The caption read, "I wouldn't be here without these two, my constants, my rocks." No tags for me. No cropped images to suggest I'd been cut out. Because I hadn't been cropped. I'd never been in the frame to begin with. I clicked through the comments, each one a congratulatory note, heart emojis, praise for the family that raised a queen. People who didn't know the history, who didn't know who paid the rent when Seraphine's first job didn't pan out, who didn't see me sitting in emergency rooms, answering her calls at midnight, covering overdraft fees. I didn't cry. That surprised me. The next morning, I pulled down a storage box from the top shelf of my closet. It was heavier than I remembered, coated in a thin layer of dust. Inside were mementos, birthday cards from Seraphine, doodles she'd slipped into my locker in middle school, an old friendship bracelet I made her at camp. I flipped through them like someone thumbing through a stranger's belongings. One by one, I placed most of it in the recycling bin, except for one card. It was from her high school graduation. She'd written inside in messy, looped letters, "You're more than my sister, you're my shield." I held on to that one. Just that one. Not because I still believed it, but because I needed to remember there was a time she did. Link to next chapter. I kept that one card. And then I stopped answering her calls. I hadn't spoken, but I had started to move. And soon, I'd act. The days that followed were strangely quiet. No more calls, just a handful of text messages from Seraphine, each one shorter than the last. Wedding updates, time changes, vendor confirmations. No greetings, no punctuation. If I didn't know better, I'd have thought they were meant for someone else. Cake tasting confirmed for Thursday, 3 p.m. Florist needs final layout by Monday. Don't forget Darren's parents are vegan. They read like bullet points in a work email. Not once did she ask how I was. Not once did she say thank you. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Something in me had shifted, like a window that had been cracked open too long, finally slammed shut. Then came the message that ended whatever fantasy I still had left. It arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. The sky had been threatening rain all day, but the clouds held off just long enough for it to feel like something was brewing. I was wrapping up a meeting when the notification popped up. A message from Seraphine. "Hey, we're moving forward with the original plan. Hope you understand. It's all about optics." Attached was a PDF. I tapped it open. The rehearsal layout. I scanned the document slowly, like I already knew what I would find, but needed to see it anyway. There it was. Oswald's name, listed beside hers under processional walk. My name didn't appear at all, not even in the logistics section. And the message, it didn't even address me by name, just you. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes after work, staring out at the sidewalk, watching people hurry by with umbrellas they hadn't needed yet. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but I didn't move. Not until the chill finally made its way through my coat sleeves. "That night," I wrote back, "you're making a choice. I'm just finally seeing it clearly." No exclamation points, no passive-aggressive smiley faces, just words. Truth. She replied within the hour. "May, come on, this isn't about you. I just need this day to go smoothly. Oswald makes things easier. Darren's family really likes him, and Mom says it's best not to stir things up. You've done so much already. People know that. Don't make it about appearances. It's not personal." Not personal. I read the message 3 times. Each time it sounded worse. People know that. Which people? The ones at the rehearsal dinner I wasn't invited to. The ones who would see Oswald walk her down the aisle while I arranged chairs behind the scenes? I didn't answer. The next morning, I deleted the entire thread. All of it. Cake notes, dress fittings, guest count emails. It felt like taking off a jacket that had been soaked for too long, heavy, cold, not mine to carry anymore. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. I didn't know where I was going, but I ended up at the park near my building. It was early, the air thick with mist, the gravel trail still damp from the night before. But for the first time in weeks, I could breathe without that familiar tightness in my chest. I passed a man walking a beagle in a yellow raincoat. A child in rubber boots leapt into a puddle with reckless joy. The ordinary details of a day that wasn't about her, or the wedding, or what I hadn't been asked to do. And for once I noticed. By the time I returned home, the fog in my chest had lifted enough to let something else in. Resolve. Quiet. Steady. Unshakable. I sat at my desk and pulled out the leather-bound notebook I used for lists, for plans, for things that mattered. This time, I didn't write vendors or deadlines. I wrote, "I will not fund the illusion that erases me." I underlined it twice. Link to next chapter. I hadn't spoken, but I had started to move. And soon, I'd act. I thought my quiet boundary would be respected, but they mistook it for surrender. It was still raining that morning, the kind of light, steady drizzle that doesn't seem threatening at first, but seeps into everything if you let it. I sat at my desk with my laptop open and a fresh legal pad beside me, the cursor blinking in a blank email. I stared at the screen for a while before finally typing the subject line. Pause on services, reevaluation in progress. I kept the tone professional. No emotion, no drama, just a statement that I needed to temporarily suspend financial coordination with the wedding vendors due to personal and logistical reevaluation. I didn't name Seraphine. I didn't explain further. I just sent it. I didn't copy her either. By the time I clicked send, it felt less like revenge and more like reclaiming air. I wasn't cutting off support out of spite. I was cutting off the lie I had allowed myself to fund. For too long, I'd written the checks and swallowed the insults, telling myself this was love. That day, I decided love had to include me too. 2 days passed before I got the first call. It was my cousin Denise, who always had one foot in every family drama. "So, I heard you pulled out because you weren't asked to be a bridesmaid?" she said, not even bothering to hide the grin in her voice. "What?" I asked flatly. "That's what people are saying, that you're, like, mad because you didn't get a title." I didn't respond right away. The narrative was out, and it was nonsense. No, I finally said. I pulled out because I was being treated like a contractor, not a sister. But sure, let them think it was about a dress. Denise laughed, like it was a punchline. You should talk to Zinnia. She's been trying to keep things from getting worse. That afternoon, I drove across town to Zinnia's place. She lived in a modest blue bungalow with wind chimes that never stopped. She greeted me with her usual lightness and a mug of herbal tea that tasted like regret. I didn't spread anything, she said before I even sat down. I looked at her. But you didn't correct it either. Zinnia set the tea down and sighed. May, people need to think what makes them comfortable. The truth? It's too messy. If they believe you're just being dramatic, that's easier for the group. Less tension. You mean less accountability? She didn't argue. I'm not here to be pitied, I said. I'm just done being the silent one everyone benefits from. Zinnia tilted her head, sympathetic but spineless. Just stay quiet a little longer. Let the day pass. It'll be over soon. I nodded, but inside, something snapped clean. That evening, I sat on my living room floor with a glass of water and a blank piece of paper. I began writing a letter, not for sending, just for saying what needed to be said out loud. When I finished, I read it to the empty room. You made me invisible, but I refused to erase myself. I folded the letter and slid it into the back of a drawer. Then I opened my laptop again. This time, I typed Seraphine's name in the to line. The subject, about the wedding. If you continue on this path, I wrote, don't expect silence to mean agreement. I sat with that sentence for a moment. No embellishment, no sugarcoating. A line had been drawn. Not with venom, not even with sadness. Just clarity. Link to next chapter. I thought my quiet boundary would be respected, but they mistook it for surrender. I didn't show up, but my absence echoed louder than any speech I could have made. The day after I sent Seraphine that warning email, I took out the folder that had been sitting in the bottom drawer of my desk, one that held every contract, invoice, and vendor agreement tied to the wedding. Every signature on those pages was mine. Every dollar, every deposit, every liability. The realization wasn't new, but it hit different now. These weren't just receipts. They were leverage. By mid-morning, I was on the phone with Nancy, an old college friend who now handled contracts for a mid-sized events firm. She wasn't surprised by the situation. You've got full standing, she said matter-of-factly. Everything's in your name. If you want out, you can get out. But I'd make it clean, put it in writing and send a formal notice. I thanked her, hung up, and booked a quick consultation with a local attorney that afternoon. We met via video call. He wore a too-big tie and spoke like someone used to being ignored until it mattered. By the time we hung up, he had drafted a cease and desist letter that made my stomach churn and my spine straighten all at once. It was precise. Cold. It stated that my name, funds, likeness, and contributions were not to be used in any public-facing content, promotion, or event execution moving forward. It revoked all financial backing, with a legal note that I would pursue restitution if any vendor continued services under the assumption I was still responsible. The next morning, I sent it out. One email per vendor, attached with the formal letter and a brief explanation. No emotion, no commentary, just facts. The florist replied first. Professional, polite, understanding. We're sorry to hear about the change. We will adjust accordingly and void the contract. A partial refund followed 2 days later. The caterer called next. She sounded nervous but relieved. We hadn't finalized the food orders yet, so we can cancel with minimal penalty. I just hope everything's okay. I told her thank you and nothing more. The venue was trickier. They pushed back, citing scheduling complications and loss of revenue. But the contract was clear. They eventually agreed to release the date, keeping the non-refundable portion, but backing off from the rest. That afternoon, I stopped at a coffee shop across the street from the venue. I ordered an Americano, sat by the window, and watched through the rain-speckled glass as staff loaded the floral arch back into a delivery truck. The pastel rose garlands looked limp, stuffed hastily into plastic bins. One worker paused to shake the rain off a bouquet before tossing it in like trash. "You can't erase me," I murmured under my breath, "but you also can't use me." It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about hurt anymore. It was about reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd lost, the right to decide what I gave and who was worth giving it to. That evening, I didn't post anything. I didn't update my status or craft a message to clarify my side. I didn't need to, but Seraphine did. Her Instagram lit up with one of those curated updates, her standing in front of the venue in a white coat, holding a binder, smiling like the world had never shifted. "Final walkthrough," the caption read, "feeling so grateful for everyone making this happen." No tag for the venue, no mention of the florist, no credit for the vendors I'd just disconnected. What struck me wasn't the gloss of it, it was the gaps. I noticed the flower arrangements were missing. The event planner I'd originally booked didn't appear in any of the videos. The smile on her face had a tightness to it, a rehearsed shine that didn't quite reach her eyes. And I knew. She was bluffing, posting like nothing had changed, hoping it would all come together anyway. But behind the scenes, the structure had already started to crumble. She may have removed me from her narrative, but now, she'd have to build one without my foundation. Link to next chapter. I didn't show up, but my absence echoed louder than any speech I could have made. I thought that was the end of it, but some debts demand to be collected in voice, not silence. It started with a voicemail from the venue coordinator at 10:07 that morning. I let it go to voicemail, then listened on speaker while folding laundry. Her voice was tight, rushed. "Hi, Maylise. Just wondering if there's been a change of plans? None of the vendors are here. We're about 90 minutes from scheduled setup, and we haven't heard from Seraphine or her team either. Can you confirm?" I didn't call back. I replied by email. "You may want to review your contracts. You'll see I'm no longer listed as the point of contact." That was it. By early afternoon, the storm had moved from paperwork to pavement. I didn't go near the venue. I didn't need to. The clips came to me. First from Jessica, one of Seraphine's bridesmaids, though she'd been posting less and less since the tension started rising. Then from a mutual friend of ours, someone I hadn't spoken to in months, who captioned their Instagram story, "What is even happening?" Guests stood under gray skies, shifting uncomfortably on wet grass. No florals, no music, no ushers. The catering truck never came. Folding chairs sat stacked to the side, untouched. Seraphine arrived late, already dressed, her makeup too bright against the overcast day. The camera caught her stepping out of a black SUV and stopping short when she saw the scene. There was no welcome, no aisle, just confusion, and then panic. Some of the guests tried to help, moving tables, asking questions no one had answers to, but no one had authority. The planners were gone. The vendors, mine, had honored my cancellation. And then came the chair. A single white folding chair sat beneath a small pergola, centered beneath the canopy, where the ceremony was supposed to take place. On it, a sign read, "For the one who made this day possible." It was meant to be a tribute, one of those warm, thoughtful gestures that wedding magazines call a touch of grace. People looked around, murmuring. A few turned toward where I should have been sitting, but then the officiant, clearly flustered, stepped up to clarify. "This seat is dedicated to Oswald, who has supported Seraphine from the beginning of her new chapter." And just like that, the murmurs stopped. Not because people agreed, but because the moment froze everyone in place. They didn't know what to say. Neither did I. I just sat on my couch, alone in my apartment, watching the video on repeat, and, God help me, I laughed. Not loud, not cruel, just a quiet breath of disbelief. It was all right there. The attempt to rewrite the story, to crown a replacement and pretend the foundation didn't exist. Rain started 15 minutes later. At first, it was light. an annoyance. But it built fast, as Portland rain tends to do when no one's ready for it. Guests scrambled for cover. Seraphine, still in heels and veil, ran from person to person, her voice too distant to be understood in the video. Her dress caught the damp earth, the hemline turning darker, heavier with each step. By the time she reached the arch, bare of flowers, just a skeleton frame, her train was streaked in mud. I didn't feel satisfied. Not in the way revenge is sometimes sold, but I did feel still. There was a quiet justice in watching the false version of the day collapse under its own weight. She tried to salvage it. She and Oswald huddled with a few staffers under a tarp near the venue's back entrance, but the guests had already begun to leave. Some didn't even say goodbye. They just slipped away into the rain. That evening, I checked her Instagram out of habit. Nothing. Not a single post. No captions. No filtered photos of first looks, cake slices, candid laughs. Just silence. Later, someone forwarded me a video from the parking lot. Oswald, shouting at one of the venue coordinators, jabbing a finger toward the main building. The staffer, young and clearly overwhelmed, held up her hands and said something that made Oswald throw his arms in the air and walk off. He couldn't fix it. Not with presence. Not with charm. And that, too, was something. Link to next chapter. I thought that was the end of it. But some debts demand to be collected in voice, not silence. I thought that was the end of it. But some debts demand to be collected in voice, not silence. The call started around 6:30 that evening, barely an hour after the guests had scattered. The tent poles had been yanked from the soggy earth, and whatever illusion Seraphine tried to build had collapsed into puddles. The first time her name lit up my phone, I stared at the screen like it might blink away. I didn't answer. Neither the second nor the third. By the time I put my phone on the counter and stepped away, 10 more had stacked up. Voicemail after voicemail, some of them nothing but static and sobs, others sharp, frantic words laced with a desperation she never used with me before. Please just undo it. Please. You didn't have to go this far. I don't know what to do. You knew they were relying on you. She's blaming me. Mom said I ruined it. Her voice cracked in the last one. I recognized that tone, not the performative panic of a social slip, but real unraveling. Still, I didn't listen to them all. I didn't save a single one. Instead, I took a long shower, let the steam coat every part of me that felt brittle. I stepped out into a quiet apartment and dried my hair without checking my phone. I made tea, sat on the couch, stared out at the dark window until my reflection stopped looking back like a stranger. At 2:14 a.m., I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen lit the room like a confession booth. I clicked compose and stared at the empty box. Then I typed, "You chose the stage. I chose the truth. Consider this your final performance. No pleasantries, no name, just that." I didn't add anything else, didn't ask her to understand. I clicked send and closed the lid. It was done. The next day, I woke to sunlight breaking through the clouds, a strange shift after weeks of dull skies. I made coffee and didn't check my phone. I didn't need to. Whatever she'd send now, it wouldn't matter. Not anymore. I walked outside and into the small patch of earth I called a garden. Gloves on, I knelt and started clearing the weeds that had crept in, while I'd been too busy saving someone else's fairy tale. My hands moved steadily, dirt pressing into my nails, grounding me more than any apology ever could. There was no music playing from the neighboring yards like usual. No kids screaming. Just the sound of a shovel slicing through soil and my breath, even for the first time in what felt like months. That afternoon, I deleted the wedding folder from my drive. Every budget sheet, every vendor contact, the color-coded calendar, gone. I blocked Seraphine's number, then Oswald's, then Vera's. Not out of spite, just necessity, like sealing off a wound that would never heal if I kept picking it open. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I just vanished. Quietly, precisely, finally. Later that evening, I returned to the garden. The sun was still hanging low, casting golden light across the yard. I planted something new, snapdragons, purple and defiant. As I pressed the roots into the ground, I whispered, not to anyone, but for myself. This is mine. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Link to next chapter. I didn't expect a response, but the one I got didn't come from Seraphine. I didn't expect a response, but the one I got didn't come from Seraphine. It arrived 2 weeks later, in the form of a pale blue envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front. No return address, just Maylise, in uneven cursive, the kind she used when she was trying too hard to be gentle. I hesitated before opening it, fingers tracing the seal like it might burn me. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. No embellishments, no long-winded monologue, just her voice, finely uncluttered. I should have stood beside you. I see that now. There was no justification, no but, no deflection toward optics or intentions. It wasn't dramatic. It was just honest. And somehow, that made it heavier than anything else she could have written. I read it 3 times that evening. Once in the kitchen while the kettle boiled, again curled on the couch as the sun dipped low, and finally sitting on the back steps, feet bare against the wood. I didn't cry. Not out of pride, but because the tears had already been spent in places that never deserved them. It wasn't an apology that fixed anything, but it was something. Seraphine never reached out. Neither did Oswald. Their silence stretched out like a highway after dusk, long, flat, without markers. I didn't chase them down it. I didn't need to. What I didn't expect, though, were the messages from others. Jessica sent a quiet text. I had no idea. I'm sorry. Zinnia, ever the peacekeeper, dropped off a potted plant at my door without ringing the bell. Attached was a note. You were right. I just didn't want to choose sides. It wasn't vindication, but it was the start of being seen again. By the first week of June, I'd signed up for a weekend course in home repair. Nothing fancy, just basic carpentry and electrical safety. The kind of skills I'd put off learning because there was always someone else to take care of it. I spent the following Saturdays in my garden, laying fresh mulch, replacing old stakes, planting marigolds next to the snapdragons. I didn't think about who was watching, or who wasn't. I stopped checking her social media, blocked the last few mutual contacts, who only knew how to pry, not support. I unsubscribed from the wedding vendor lists and deleted the backup folder I'd forgotten in my email drafts. The silence I once feared had become something else entirely, not an absence, a boundary. I no longer felt the need to defend myself, not to her, not to anyone. I had spoken with my choices, and I'd learned that some of the strongest voices aren't loud. They're consistent. In the quiet, I found myself again. Not the fixer, not the buffer, not the silent funder of someone else's spotlight. Just Maylise. Forgiveness doesn't always wear a dress and give a speech. It was something I whispered to myself while pruning lavender, something I finally believed. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't for them. It was for me. To stop holding on to the anger like a badge, to let the scar close without reopening it for show. I didn't walk her down the aisle, but I walked myself through fire and came out clean. Sometimes, life teaches you that walking away is louder than staying to explain yourself. I used to believe that family meant unconditional loyalty, no matter how much it cost you. But what I've learned is that boundaries are not betrayals. They are survival. This journey wasn't just about a wedding. It was about reclaiming my voice after years of being edited out of my own story. I didn't get the apology I deserved, and I didn't get closure from everyone involved. But I found peace, and more importantly, I found myself. To anyone watching who's ever been the quiet one, the one holding it all together behind the scenes, know this: you are allowed to stop. You are allowed to protect your peace. And you are allowed to rewrite the ending if the script no longer honors your truth. What would you have done in my place? Would you have kept silent or spoken up sooner? Have you ever felt erased by the very people you supported? I'd love to hear your story. If this video touched something in you, comment with a 1, or tell me where you're watching from. If it didn't land for you, I'd still love to know why. Your voice matters here. And hey, if you found value in this story, if you believe in voices that rise from the quiet, hit that subscribe button. There are more stories to come, ones that heal, provoke, and remind us we're not alone. Thanks for listening. And remember, your silence doesn't have to be your sentence.